Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I'm going to talk to you about why I am not a minimalist. So we all know the arguments for why minimalism is great for the environment, and it is. I mean, the evidence is sound, but I have decided to go a different route with my environmental lifestyle, and I want to talk a bit about why I've decided to do that. So this video could also be titled A New Way to Think About Recycling, and it's essentially hoarder versus minimalist and recycling rubbish versus supplies. So I tend to hoard an awful lot of things that would otherwise go in the recycling or the bin, whether that's old clothing items, whether that's pieces of cardboard, pieces of plastic, pieces of paper, all sorts of different things that really I don't necessarily need at that moment in time, but I can see them being a useful craft supply for my DIY projects in the future. So one of the examples of this that you've seen a lot on my channel recently is old t-shirts, old pyjamas, old items of clothing, where I harvest the fabric and I use that to make new things. So I've made, from one pair of pyjamas in the past few weeks, I've made baby cloth wipes, I've made baby scratch mitts, and I've made a maternity nursing bra, just from one pair of pyjamas. So these things, you can expand their life cycle. If they're not good enough to donate to a charity shop or to gift to someone else as second-hand, then they can still be used, even small parts of them can still be used as supplies for sewing projects. So that's a prime example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about. Other sorts of things that I might save, when I buy bed sheets, you know, bed sheets tend to come in those plastic envelopes that are the very bendy plastic that doesn't crinkle and crackle, and it's quite thick. So that plastic is really good to have in my sewing stash for anything that needs to have a plastic window, or anything that needs to be wiped down or that needs to be waterproof. Other examples of this are things like old mattress protectors. They make very good waterproof layers when constructing things like cloth sanitary pads, cloth nappies, the breast pads that I made, the nursing pads, all these sorts of things where you need PUL. An old mattress protector will give you meters and meters of PUL for far less than you would pay to buy it online or from a haberdashery or fabric shop. So these are some prime examples of why I hoard things. So the downside of hoarding things is that you have to find somewhere to store it. So if you saw my budget eco-friendly nursery video, you will have seen all of these cardboard boxes that I made. So these were actually made from old packing cases from when we moved house. So all the big cardboard boxes, and I cut them down and reassembled them with my glue gun and covered them in felt and put twill tape things on. So I made these sort of storage drawers, and I made those for several different pieces of furniture. So we now have these sort of fabric storage boxes made from old cardboard packing cases. But that provides me with a lot of storage to put these things in. But then I have to make the decision on a regular basis of whether or not I'm actually going to use something that I've hoarded. Otherwise you end up on a television programme like 50 Years a Hoarder, or I don't know what the television programmes are called, but you know the ones I mean. So it's a fine balancing act between being practical and keeping things that you might actually use, and on a regular basis sorting through and working out whether or not you ever actually use those things, and if not, then finding another way to recycle them outside of the home. So this is basically why I'm not a minimalist. So I follow a lot of YouTubers and a lot of blogs and social media accounts of people who are minimalists. I'm very into the tiny house living movement, and I fundamentally believe that we don't need nearly as much stuff as we have. I tend to avoid this by just not buying anything, which works well for me, both budget-wise and in terms of space and accumulating stuff. But you get stuff all the time, whether that's stuff that you've been gifted, stuff that you've made, stuff that you've bought. So I had to stop recording for quite a little while there while the recycling men did the entire crossroads that my rental house is on. So I've lost my train of thought, so I'm just going to pick up where I think I left off. So we get a lot of things that come into our lives and into the house through various different means, and I think it's still important to regularly assess our belongings and go through and decide which things we need and which things we no longer need, whether that's clothing, whether that's decor objects, whether that's practical things like kitchen cooking utensils and so on, and making sure that we keep our cupboards functional, that we can still open and close our wardrobes and our chest of drawers and so on, but also when I'm doing these sort of culling exercises, I try to look at each item primarily as, do I still need it? And secondary, what else could I use it for? Is there some way that I can reuse this item or repurpose this item before considering donating it elsewhere? So one of the things that I do with clothing items is, if they're in good condition, they could be reused by somebody else, then I'll often either gift them to somebody else, or I will donate them to a charity shop or a charity clothing drive, where they can actually earn money for another charity. But if the clothing item is damaged in some way, or the quality of the fabric, areas where it's thinned or it's bobbled or something, and it really wouldn't be resaleable if it's got stains in certain areas and so on, then I'll look at it in terms of harvesting it for fabric. So I actually have a stash of clothing items that aren't fit for donation, that I use as my sort of fabric haberdashery, where I can go in and say, okay, for this project this item would work really well. So in a lot of my videos, as far back as when I made 2 little dog coats for my dog Charlie and his friend, I made those out of an old dressing gown. This is something that I've been doing for a long time, and in my stash I actually have items, scraps of fabric from that dressing gown still there, which I'm actually intending to make into a cuddly toy teddy bear soon for the baby. But these pieces of fabric that I harvest from the garments go into my sewing stash, and then I've got sewing supplies all the time for my DIY projects that have come from things that really had no further use to them. And there are many things, items of furniture, items of decor, all sorts of things in the garden, things that we've picked up, scrap materials and things that we end up holding on to for a while, and then we no longer have a use for them, and some of those items get donated, some of those items get recycled. We're very lucky in this country to have recycling plants, which are the rubbish tip, but you go along and they've got different sections where you can get rid of different types of material, and you sort it into the appropriate bins, and then they'll recycle it, and they make their money out of making sure that those supplies go back into the production chain. So if you're recycling textiles there, that those textiles are actually going to be recycled into building insulation and all sorts of things like that. So it's a good situation all round, because we've got access to these wonderful recycling facilities, Also donating things to charity shops and gifting items, particularly through things like Facebook Marketplace and eBay secondhand, or through Facebook groups and things, putting out a notice saying, does anyone want this? And a lot of the time we give the things away for free. If they're worth anything, sometimes I will resell them for some money. A lot of the things that we resell, we get almost as much back as we paid for them, because I often bought them secondhand in the first place, or we were gifted them. So we don't buy a lot of new things. So when we do tend to sell things secondhand, we do tend to make our money back on them. So that's basically why I'm not a minimalist. I do believe in minimalism, and I think that if you are not going down the DIY and crafting route, if that's not something where your skill sets lie, then the whole minimalist ethos is a very good way to go. It doesn't work for me on my budget, and the way that I make things work is by hoarding. So I'm not a minimalist, I'm definitely more of a hoarder. I do try very carefully to control my hoarding tendencies and stop myself from getting out of control, but that's the way that I choose to approach my environmentally friendly lifestyle. So I thought that would be an interesting topic for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you would like to see more content like this. And let me know in the comments section below whether you are more of a minimalist or more of a hoarder. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.